Hi, I'm John Atack, and I'm extraordinarily pleased to talk with Roger Nygard. Hi, Roger.
Hello, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been, about 12 years or something since last we met?
My film, The Nature of Existence, came out in 2010, and we spoke probably, I guess, 2 years before that. So, we're going 13 years, over a dozen.
Yeah. So what have you been doing in the last 12 years? No, that's possible.
Up to my usual tricks. You know, I moved on to a new topic after making a documentary about the nature of existence. I had to find a topic even more inexplicable than existence itself, and then I settled on marriage. Yeah. And so I solved that conundrum next.
It's incredible the work you've done. I think, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche just don't compare, really.
They're very jealous of me.
And their jokes are no good compared with the stuff in your wonderful documentaries. You also made Trekkies 2.
That was my first documentary. Was about Star Trek fans, correct?
Yeah. And the amazing thing is they invited you back for more after you'd ridiculed and lambasted them.
They were so upset with the first round that we had to go back, and I guess by doubling it up, it sort of cross-canceled it or something.
That's the thing. It evened it all out. And you directed the US version of The Office, and
yes, worked on that, and several other TV shows I've directed and edited. That's how I pay for the documentaries, is working in television.
And let me say, with Nature of Existence, because I did watch it, it was just an incredible project. You went around the world. You talked with priests in the Vatican City. You went to Jerusalem and talked to rabbis. I think you went to Taiwan and talked to Taoist sages, to India, talked to fakirs, if you'll excuse me using that word. And then you came and talked to me for some reason, along with neurologists and psychologists, physicists, and I think you talked to Richard Dawkins the day after you talked to me, somebody genuinely famous.
The interesting thing is, of that entire list, none of those people has any more reason or right to claim what is true or not true about the afterlife than you do.
Yes, yeah. And you had about 2 hours worth of questions, and you ran all of us through that, which was, talk about brainwashing. And
I wear you down until then the last few questions, finally the truth comes out.
Yeah, and you send us off to Guantanamo Bay. The thing of particular interest to me in the, talking about authoritarian abuse and control is, and I have it right here, is this wonderful film, which I rewatched this week after a few years, and isn't Daniel Benzali incredible? What a great actor, It's smart, it's funny, it tells stories well, the characters are really well formed, it's even quite well directed. But what you're talking about here comes from the sale of cars and how second-hand cars, particularly, how cars are sold in the United States, which is a little bit different to where it is here. But it features also a wonderful documentary with your co-author, who happened to be somebody who knew about selling cars. And he gets into the tricks and traps, which you'll see. And I've got to say that if there's anybody watching who ever needs to buy a car, they should watch this film first and the documentary.
The film is called Suckers, and it's about... My co-writer, Joe Yannetti, sold cars for 2 years, and we based his experience, we used his experiences to write the screenplay and to make it as accurate as possible. We also interviewed several other car salesmen, and I went and observed and hung out with them, and they told stories, and we distilled it down to what are the psychological tricks that they have been taught, or they're taught, to sell cars. And these tricks ultimately go all the way back to the rug bazaars in Persia. They've been manufactured and perfected over time. They're the same techniques used if you want to manipulate anybody into saying yes. There are ways to get there faster. And particularly when there's a lot of money on the line, buying a car is probably the second largest purchase anyone will make after buying a house. And so there's a lot at stake. And these guys and saleswomen and men, they know how to make a lot of money. They can make as much money as a doctor their first year selling cars, right from the start.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I was deeply involved with the Scientology cult, let's use that word. And towards the end of my involvement, I was on the edge, I was on the periphery, I was never a live-in member, and I had a pretty easy time of it. Just about everybody else I've talked to was abused and humiliated along the way in various ways. I wasn't. But in the last few months of my involvement, my wife started taking their internal selling course, which is called the Registrar Sales Course. And I was horrified to find that they were using a manual called Big League Sales Closing Techniques by a guy called Les Dane. And it goes through, there's a brick overcoat of resistance and you take away the bricks, whatever people bring up. But so, in years decades of looking at the way that selling happens, it seems to me that all forms of coercive control, exploitative persuasion, rely upon initially deception. That's the foundation for all of it, that you're not being told everything, But they then have a hard selling approach. I've recently watched Seduced, the documentary about Nexium. And, I'm reading about that because I'm probably going to write a book about it. And it's amazing the way that the hard sell techniques just transfer. They go from selling a car to selling, multi-level marketing to therapy cults like the Forum, Landmark Trust, LifeSpring, through to pseudo-religious groups. Wherever you go, the techniques will be the same. And it's interested me that they're compartmentalized. So when somebody leaves the Jehovah's Witnesses, they feel they've had a unique experience. But in fact, they've been through the same steps that the car salesman would put them through. And the thing that Joe Yannetti emphasizes and underlines in the documentary is control. And which I think is very sage, that you're coming back to who is controlling the conversation and how is that happening.
Yeah, in the movie, you watch as the salesmen learn, as the general sales manager teaches these new car salesmen how to control the situation. And even no matter what objection they have, he teaches them what to say. There's a comeback for every objection. And there's a scene where he likes to challenge them. Come on, give me anything, give me any excuse. And he's got a reason, he's got a comeback or an answer for every possible objection. And interestingly, it's something I discovered or came to the conclusion of when I was making my film, The Truth About Marriage, that I realized every relationship that you have, I have, everyone has, whether it's parent and spouse or with your significant other or with your boss, coworker, every relationship is a power struggle that continues. You'll have some kind of obstacle or disagreement or something you're not on the same page about. You have it out. It's in some way, whether it's passive aggressively or face to face, and then a new equilibrium is established for a while until somebody gets out of balance, and then you do it again. Boss, I need more money. No, I can't afford to pay you more. That's ongoing. Or with your child, I don't want to go to sleep. You've got to go to bed at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. And so there's a negotiate. Well, how about 8:15? And until a new equilibrium and more power is granted, or someone gets caught cheating in a relationship, and now big power struggle happens, and somebody realizes I no longer have the control I thought I had in this relationship. Somebody else has it, and this awareness happens. It's a natural human dynamic that happens in every relationship, and car salesmen or religious cults have taken this understanding and they utilize it and use it against you to achieve an outcome that's better for themselves and worse off for you.
Yeah, and I think that it comes to the heart of, having looked at cults, so-called, for so many years, I've come down to talking about authoritarian groups and authoritarian relationships. And that is where one person has power, and I'm not going to mention Donald Trump at all during this conversation. One person believes that they should have power. They are a very stable genius or something like this, and so they believe they should be in charge, and that's one end of the authoritarian spectrum. At the other end are about 2/3 of the population who believe that somebody else should tell them what to do. Now, I think that there are some people who are capable of brokering those power relationships, and I agree with you that it's an important dynamic in human relationships. There are people who are capable of brokering those power relationships so that both sides win, so that both sides get something they want. But in probably the majority of relationships, as you say, you actually reminded me of a conversation I had with, he was the senior editor for the Reader's Digest in the UK. This was about 30 years ago. I was at a party with this guy, and he was explaining to me that all relationships are about power, and that somebody always has the upper hand, and in a marriage or wherever. I think it's a matter of you sometimes, that kind of simple tribal relationship doesn't happen. There are only two societies, I'm told, in the world that don't have a chief and a tribal relationship. One is the San people, called the Bushmen of the Kalahari, and the other are the Ba'aka Pygmy. And that's about your lot. But they don't have a boss. They don't have somebody that tells them what to do, probably because they don't fight war. That it's not a part of their culture to go and hit the people next door. And so whoever's best at something leads when they do that activity. So with the Ba'aka, for example, if you're particularly good at climbing trees, that's very good because they love honey. Honey makes up about 15% of their diet. It's very, so much for the Paleolithic diet, eh? And the problem is that the bees, the uneducated bees, they make their nests 80 feet up. And so if you can climb trees, then you're a celebrity among the Ba'aka, and you will lead them in, climbing up there. Apparently a fair amount of them fall out of the trees and die. So, not necessarily so good. But I think it is possible, and maybe I'm a dreamer, maybe just a fool, but I think it is possible to have relationships where the power is shared, and where, and possibly looking at human society, this is where we've been going wrong all of this time, in not finding ways where at least the majority of people are satisfied. And I think that's the idea of democracy, though, with Duterte, Bolsonaro, Modi, Abe, that Boris Johnson, it doesn't seem to be necessarily working properly, that it is for the good of the people that these people are in charge. And we do seem to be capable of investing power in the most idiotic people, and most selfish people. Scott Morrison in Australia, let's add him to the list. I don't want him to feel excluded. So, yeah, I agree with you. Power relationships, that is how it usually happens. So in this conversation, which of us actually has the power at the moment, do you think?
Good question. It's your podcast, and you sent me the link, so that sets it up right from the beginning that you're the host, and you're going to lead the direction that we go. Occasionally, I might go off on a tangent, but then it'll go back to you, and then you will take the rudder again, I think. And yes, I think we share. One person can't do everything. Monet can't paint the entire train station himself. He's going to need help.
He did do it though. In 1870, when St Pancras Station was built, he. But
if the tribe is waiting and they need to eat, I remember reading a study once about any species that lives in a group has to learn how to get along as a group, and there are advantages because there's safety in numbers, and so it's a positive to live in a group. And if you watched, I think they were studying deer, and deer they live in little groups of deer, and when they want to make a decision about which way to go, one of the deer doesn't just take over and say we're going this way. They all sort of point in one direction or another, and where the majority are pointing, they take as a group consensus, and that's the direction they go. So it's not a conscious, we're going to go this way. everybody kind of gets a feeling, and we say who feels is most about east or the most about north, and most are pointing north. So the group starts going that way, and it's just a dynamic that has evolved, much like reciprocal altruism, which we call morality, where in a group of deer or any group, they're aware of who owes who a favor, who's pulling their weight, who's not, and those dynamics evolve over time for a group to be successful. And so that's the same for humans. There are times when we need a strong, vicious maniac of a leader. If we're in the middle of a fight and there's two tribes, maybe the one with the most vicious leader is going to come out victorious, pass on genes from that group, and that leads to more sociopaths. And there's a limit. I remember reading a study about sociopaths where it's pretty stable around, 4 to 7% sociopaths in human society. It doesn't. If it gets above that, it becomes unstable. If it gets below that, similarly, it's not as adaptive. And if you want to have a good stockbroker or a good surgeon or a good pilot, you probably want a sociopath. They have their place in society because they're not going to freak out in an emergency. They're going to continue to focus and fix the problem and get the job done, whereas somebody much more prone to emotional reactivity may not function as successfully under those circumstances. So that's why the theory is that they exist in our society. Humans have these people, and many of them rise to the top of the political ranks and become leaders of a country, which can be very detrimental if they have no empathy and don't care about the people. They're there for other reasons, and you end up in a situation like the United States was in recently, where you have someone who only cares about themselves and not about what's best for the people that are being led.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not going to mention any names there, just in case we get sued, because that person actually is one of the most litigious people who's ever lived, almost as litigious as Ron Hubbard, who of course is the most litigious person who ever lived. They dropped 3,000 court cases in a single day in 1991 in the US. So, there's something for the Guinness Book of World Records. There is a problem. There are several problems. The first is, for example, about 3 years ago, a surgeon in this country went to prison for having performed 1,000 unnecessary operations. So if the sociopath doesn't have people who are willing to stand up to him and say, and in this case, he was a breast surgeon and he was supposed to be excising cancers, but they didn't exist. And all the people around him knew this. Everybody knew that this was going on, but nobody bothered to do anything about it, which can be a little bit of a problem. My friend Ora Chalef has come up with the concept of courageous followership, which, don't keep your mouth shut, as it's also known.
And also get three opinions. If you've got any big issue, it's incumbent on you, the consumer of medical services, to do your homework. Yeah.
I mean, in systems where you either A, don't have the money, or B, as we have a health service for everyone here, but it can be quite difficult to get a second opinion if you can't pay for it. But I couldn't agree with you more. You definitely need another opinion. It could also be said there's another class of surgeon, people who have Asperger's syndrome, and they too will not necessarily, I've dealt with a few consultants who had this, and they can be phenomenally good at what they do because they're not distracted by any of the other stuff. So the other problem, and the problem in warfare, that there is some work on the use of sociopaths, the kind of Kelly's Heroes, Dirty Dozen kind of idea of we get the criminals together and get them because they're vicious and the problem is that they tend to screw things up. So they don't make very good soldiers. In fact, the term psychopath was partly developed, it originates in the 19th century, it was partly developed after the First World War, when they found there were a lot of malingerers in hospital, that there were people, and they found this class of people who didn't want to go and sacrifice their lives, for some reason. So it's a balance of traits. You then get the prosocial sociopaths. This James Fallon wrote a wonderful book, and he's a a neuroscientist with two biotech companies, and he had brain scans done of himself and I think 9 members of his family, just to see if there were any Alzheimer's plaques or anything going wrong. And he had them anonymized so that he wouldn't, it wouldn't get in the way of looking at them. And one of them had the expected deficit of connection between the old and new brain, the paralimbic connection. And he said, "Oh, who's this?" And his assistant went, "Oh, well, actually, Jim, it's you." And he, all his life, believed that everything was genetic. And he's in his 50s now. And he looks at this and he goes, well, and he thought about it. And he then found he had the 3 alleles that are associated with sociopathy too. Then his mum told him that he had 7 ancestors that she knew of who had been murderous on his father's side, obviously, including Lizzie Borden, who may not have actually done it, I'm told. But so he wrote this great book where he's basically saying he loves playing tricks on people. If some bespectacled professor goes out with him one evening, they will end up dancing naked on the table. If he's invited to a party when he's just got dressed to go to a funeral, he'll go to the party. He took his brother to Marburg in Kenya on holiday, and it's only when his brother got home and he said, "Marburg Ebola. You've just taken me to the caves where the bats are that first spread this form of Ebola." So he does these things. He behaves in this way, and yet he runs a biotech company. He does these positive things, and he had to say it's not all genetic. It cannot all be genetic because I have all the genetic stuff. But he said his mother, by the time he was 2 years old, had realised there was something strange about him. And so she treated him differently. And he grew up with, I guess with sociopaths, you have to reason with them and explain why it's to their benefit not to pull the wings off the fly or whatever it is they're about to do. So, but
if you're a member of a tribe and the tribe is going to expel them, which in the old days, 200,000 years ago would mean death, they're going to behave more likely than if they're in a society that cherishes self-wealth accumulation and at any expense. Those two environments are going to have different outcomes for the same person.
And interesting to see that our own society is so much controlled by people who have money and power. That I remember when John Kerry was running for president, that he set up a marquee and you could go in and talk to him. I think you had to donate $150,000 and then you could go and shake his hand and pitch what you wanted him to do. And Barack Obama on his first day signed things making it harder to leave government service and become a lobbyist, but it's a problem that's far from solved. These people have way too much power, and the problem is often that they got to that power by being rapacious bastards. It
works. It's a path to the top that works for many. If you go into warfare against a sociopath, whether it's literal or as a car salesman, if you're negotiating over money, that's a small skirmish over financial property or money. If you're in battle against a sociopath, you cannot use the same techniques you would use against someone who's more normative, because they won't feel any sympathy toward you, no matter what sympathy you try to play on. In fact, they will use your empathy against you. And those malingerers who were in the hospital were using people's empathy against them by claiming, "Oh, I'm in such pain, I can't leave. And so, oh, I'm so sorry you feel that way. Stay here in this bed until you're better." Well, now they've been rewarded for using that technique, avoiding the battlefield, preserving their life another day, getting free meals, and reclining in a bed. They learn over time what they can use to achieve their ends. And that's what Reggie in Suckers is teaching his sales team, are the techniques to use, because clearly Reggie would have to be a sociopath or in that arena pretty adjacent at least in order to behave that way. And you see it in one scene where our salesperson, who is the protagonist, at whose eyes we enter the world of car salesmen through, he feels badly about a family that he overcharged. They come back asking for him to give them a break.
Yeah, I remember,
and he feels bad for them because he's normative. So he goes to Reggie and says, could we give these guys a break? I think we overdid it. They're going to go bankrupt. And then what happens? And Reggie says, follow me. And he walks over there and says, is this your signature on the contract? The guy says, yes. Says, get out of here. You're a fucking owner. And so that shows right there how Reggie has no regard for anyone's situation or feelings whatsoever. That's not the game in his mind. And then in Act 3, we created a scene where it comes to a head where Bobby, who is the salesperson with feelings, starts to have this real crisis, and he erupts at a sales meeting at the rest of the salesmen who are making fun of the customers. And he says, you should treat them with more respect. And then Reggie overhears this and comes in, and he gives an equally persuasive argument for why you should be proud of being the best at what you do. If they get a car for less money, they're taking money out of your pocket. If you sell the car for more money, you're taking money out of their pocket. What's the difference? They're doing it to you as well as you're doing it to them. So be the best and be proud. And it's a persuasive argument that let the buyer beware. And the point that comes out of that Joe Yannetti, my writing partner, learned is that the buyer has all the power because you have the money. If you walk into a car dealership, you have the money. They want your money. So you actually have the power, but they're trying to convince you that they have the power. And you start to believe it because of the tricks in the sociological arena they put you within, so that you'll hand over your money. And you don't own the car until you physically take possession, which means drive it off the lot. So you at any point can say, you know what, forget it, not interested. You can walk away, leaving the guy with nothing for his time.
Yeah.
And if you know that going in, you can stay in the power position the whole time and get a much better deal for your car than if you let them convince you they have the power. That's why they'll often, after you buy a car, they'll get you to just take it for a test drive around the block and make sure you feel good about it. Because once you drive it off the lot for that test drive around the block, you're now the owner. So you should not drive the car off the lot until everything is the way you want it. It has the stereo you want in it. It has the tires, the upgrades, floor mats, whatever you ask for. Everything should be exactly the way you want it before those wheels leave the curb of the car dealership. Because that's when you lose the power.
Yeah, and it's a very good point. I'm reading about Nexium at the moment, and a book by Sarah Edmondson called Scarred, which is about the literal brand marks that were put on them. And you think brand mark, and you think branding iron. Yeah, that's what they do with the dogies in the movies. No, they used something much more like a soldering iron. And it took anywhere up to 45 minutes to put Keith Ranieri's initials on the pudenda, the mons veneris, the bit inside the panties, so that nobody would see they'd got these awful scars. And she talks about being asked to recruit her friends. And she said, I don't feel comfortable about taking money from my friends. And you get this wonderful argument about, how wrong it is to not, be rewarded for giving them this marvelous thing where they too can be branded, at some point. I'm happy, Keith Ranieri's now has 120 years in prison to face, which I think he got off lightly. Personally, I think there should have been a soldering iron involved. And I am not the sort of person that believes in any kind of punishment, but he's such an evil human being. But as you say, the power dynamic shifts and it's. In all recruitment situations, you're absolutely right. The person who's being recruited has the power, and the thing is to take that away from them. And one of the first ways of doing that is Bob Cialdini's reciprocity, where you've been given something, and an ordinary pro-social person will want to give something back. So and it can be as small as that they've given you a cup of coffee, or when the Krishnas used to walk around on the streets, they'd give you spiritual sky joss sticks, incense sticks, and you would normally give something back to them, offer them some money, far more than they were worth. A friend of mine, actually, they loaded him up with incense sticks. They gave him a free record of some singing and chanting in the temple, everything the guy had got. And he said, thanks very much, and walked off. And the Krishna monk went after him going, aren't you going to give me something? He said, you just gave me these things, And you know what happened to the Krishna monk when he got back to the temple, So there's this idea, that's part of it. Then you've got the love bombing aspect, where you big somebody up and make them feel, that they're really fantastic. And again, they'll feel they need to give something back to you. In the movie, you have a guy who's saying he'll have to ask his wife. And that's immediately turned round to, oh, so she makes the decisions for you. And so,
I don't have to ask anybody to sell the car. Why do you have to ask your wife if you can buy it?
Yeah,
and it undercuts his manhood and makes him, it lures him into a trap where he makes a choice.
Yeah, and the logical fallacy. I don't have to ask anybody to sell it to you. These are two things of a completely different order of magnitude. But again, that's where slipping something past somebody so that they feel. Yeah, they have to have their machismo intact. They have to respond.
You have to keep in mind, too, that when you go to buy a car, it's like you're going up against someone who does this every day and has studied and learned under people who've done this their whole lives and have been studying techniques that go back thousands of years. And a lot of people think, oh, I'll go in and I'll get a good deal. It's like saying, I'm going to go in and I'm going to play tennis against Serena Williams and I'm sure I can beat her. I play tennis, once every 2 years.
Yeah.
No, you're going to get slaughtered because she practices probably every single day. And it's the same with buyers and sellers. And that's why you need to do your homework before you buy a car. Get yourself on at least an even footing. And the way you do that is you find out what is the dealer paying for the car you want. You've got to know exactly which car you want so they can't switch you to something else.
Yeah.
And then you have to learn the invoice price, the dealer price for the car, and all of the options you want, and the financing, so that you can say, that way you can keep the power by saying, I will give you a $200 profit on the car above what you're paying for it if you'll sell it to me. So then the car salesman is now begging you to come up in price as opposed to you trying to beg them to come down from the sticker price, which is what they want to do. That's called dealing from the top, and you want to deal from the bottom. That's how you turn the tables on a car dealer.
Yeah, and I think it's vital advice in the purchase of anything to really understand the market before you get involved. Obviously, with religions, this is a bit more difficult because you're kind of going, well, how many prayers will I have to say for how many years in heaven? And the deal might be quite difficult. But when you look at the amazing things that people give up, I'm interviewing a guy called Mike Rinder who for 20 years was running harassment for Scientology against people. And yes, I know in 2008 when we talked, I refused to answer any questions about Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And here I am doing it again all these years later. So, you just have to forgive me for that. But I talked with Mike and, we've met before. We met in 95 when he came over to destroy me, to use the word he used. And he said, he seemed like a nice guy, but you're opposed to Scientology, so, you have to be destroyed. You have to get rid of you. And here we are all of these years later, and he talked to me about arriving at Hubbard's flagship in Lisbon in 1973, and he's 18 years old. And the deal is that his parents have paid for him to come over. He was 6 when they got involved in Scientology in Australia. He is contracted to the Australian organisation, and he's come to do the Flag Executive Briefing Course, which is the most wonderful management training ever devised by man. And he arrives, and he's 18 years old, and they take his passport away. And he says, right, when do I start the course? And they say, oh, no, there's been a change of plan. The organisation has decided that we're going to send them 2 missionaires who are going to help them sort things out, and you belong to us now. And I've talked with more than 1,000 members of this organisation over the years, and even I was flabbergasted at the simple statement that he'd now been trafficked as a slave. And what are you going to do about it? You're 18 years old, you're halfway around the world from where you live, you've got no money, your passport's gone, and nobody's on your side. And it's also much part of that same dynamic of, selling a car, selling a belief system, that then when you've bought the car, you've got to justify to everybody around. This is when you start taking your friends to the same dealer so they can be fleeced, which also comes up in the movie. And there's that, you've bought into the thing and now bringing other people in. I've seen it often with born-again Christians, that the first 6 months to a year, they're in the honeymoon period, and their eyes are shining because they're so sure that they've been forgiven and redeemed. Then it turns to a kind of steely look as they desperately want to recruit you to prove that they were right in making that choice. So, they've crossed over a boundary there.
Yeah, that's what happens with car dealers. And they know that customers will bring their friends to you, and they push you to do it. What makes a good car salesperson is not that they're hard-nosed negotiators. It's that they are charismatic, and they make the customer like them as a person. And when you like somebody, you trust them more. And when you trust them, if they can make that bond of trust, then people will bring their friends because, I trust this guy. And then what they've done is even more insidious than if they were upfront about it and more hard-nosed negotiator where you kind of both know your places. They're really they're making friends with you and in the meantime taking your money.
Yeah. Which is an interesting kind of friendship. Looking at, say, Chris Voss's work on hostage negotiation, he was the FBI's chief negotiator. It really surprised me to go, wait a minute, he does almost the same things that I would do if I was intervening to help somebody reconsider their involvement with a group. And the rapport building is the first stage, that you first of all, you get on a first name basis with somebody, and you make them like you. This is a necessary part of it, and it will come with the car salesman. Indeed, I can remember in Scientology there were some astonishing salespeople, and they were the most charming people. I remember this one guy, Jamie Dodwell. I'm going to name him; he can sue me. And he was.
You're making a compliment. You're complimenting him that he's excellent at what he does.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you say about Mao Zedong, he was a brilliant mass murderer. Or as Duterte of the Philippines says, the only thing I'm accused of is the extrajudicial killings. I haven't taken the handbag from an old lady or anything. I've just murdered some people. What is wrong with you? So, yeah. But Jamie Dodwell set up a business where they put these spray claddings on the front of houses, over the brickwork. And he decided it was a waste of time using the primer because, hey, you'd have to pay for that. And he gave a lifetime guarantee to all of these things. And I talked with a guy who worked for him who's a professional, and he said, he's not putting the primer on. That's the glue. This stuff will fall off. And sure enough, within a year, the stuff was falling off. And you got into this. He was a really delightful human being. Who's one of many Scientologist salespeople that I met, and they're just so smiling and friendly and happy. And you really, if you shake hands with them, you really have to count your fingers afterwards, because they are that quick at getting something out of you. And so, I've these last years I've been largely involved with preventative work. Scientology is just something I use to exemplify things. I'm not really involved in their day-to-day activities. I couldn't care less what David Miscavige does. It's going to be the same that he did yesterday and 10 years ago. But in talking about prevention, that I am now your new best friend, that's really the thing to get through to teenagers, that anybody that comes up at you who is that friendly and you don't know, they could be perfectly genuine, they could be a lovely empath, but you should be suspicious, you should be skeptical of that friendship, especially if there's a price tag on it.
Yeah, sadly, teenagers think they know everything, and the funny thing is they don't. And the car salesman idea is that the more a customer thinks they know everything, the worse they're going to get screwed. The doctors and lawyers come in thinking they're going to do great because they're really smart. They fleeced them the worst. The ones who are skeptical and doubtful and I'm not so sure and who've done their homework, they get the best deal.
There's I forget the guy's name, but he was a professor who did work with con men for decades. The movie The Sting is based on one of his books. And he, in talking really with a legion of con men over the decades, again and again heard that the easiest people to con are old rich men, because they're convinced that they achieved what they achieved through their genius and their perception of others. And so they'll come back to be conned a second or even a third time because you've managed to blame it off on the guy who recruited them. But they'll come back to the con man himself and do the thing again. So that, and again, in the cult field, it is repeatedly said, the easiest people to recruit are those who know they're invulnerable.
Yeah.
I when I was involved in Scientology, there were two cases where one was a psychologist or somebody with a degree in psychology, but there were two people who absolutely thought that Scientology was abhorrent and dreadful. So I recruited them. It's just the way of it. And I remember talking with a guy he'd been on the 14 people running all of Scientology. He was 18 years old at the time, because that was, Hubbard was really into teenagers at this time in the early 80s. And after 2 evenings of interviewing him about his astonishing experiences on the watchdog committee of Scientology, where Hubbard had sent down this order saying, it's too late, I can't save the world, you're the only people I can save, it's going to end. This is 1981, in case you didn't realise the world did end then. And this guy, because he'd been brought up by a Scientologist parents, said, I'm going home to die with them. And that's how he left, because it's like, what's the point? The other 13 people at the table he'd had enough of. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life with them. But after 2 evenings and 6 or 7 hours of conversation, he said to me, the great thing, John, is we'll never be conned again. And it was like, oh, no. The great thing is I know I'm very gullible. And as long as I maintain that position,
Right, know you're gullible. And the way to avoid being conned, or one of the best ways, is to never make the choice in the moment that you are considering making a choice. For example, you should always test drive the car before you buy it so you know what you're getting, but never buy the car after the test drive. The salesmen call it, that's when the customer is in the ether, when they're really excited, and they're willing to spend more money when they're excited, just like you're willing to buy more food when you're hungry. So you should take the test drive one day and then leave. Absolutely do not stay and buy the car the same day. Come back another day and buy the car. If you just follow that one rule, don't sign today, sleep on it, right? Take time and sleep on it so that you can get out of the ether and look at something logically. Or joining a cult, joining a religion, joining a group, joining anything, signing anything. Don't do it the same day that you're being pitched or considering it. Always have a cooling off period. And then you'll make a more logical decision, whatever it is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, in English law, there is a cooling off period. Up to, I think, 7 days after you've signed a contract, you can revoke it.
That's an attempt to address that, because that's what human beings do. We pay way too much when we're excited.
I mean, my father was he was a salesman. He was an export sales manager for various companies. He travelled around the world selling huge quantities of pipe fittings or electrical things or what have you, conveyor belts at one point. And yet, when somebody came round to sell double glazing, he just signed. And that's one of the other things about salesmen, that they're often quite easy to sell things to. There's a vulnerability there. I had an episode with my mother. She needed an adjustable bed. And this guy came round and he did the whole pitch. It took him about 20 minutes. And she looked at him and said, no, it's not my decision. My son will decide. Now, I'd been in the room all the time, and he just turned to me and verbatim gave me the same pitch. So after I'd listened to the pitch, I took him out into the garden and asked him a few questions. And the first was, what book do you use? And he said, Napoleon Hill. I said, what, 1930s? No, read Bob Cialdini's Influence, that's much better. And he was starting to get defensive, and he started saying, well, look, I'm a Christian, and I go back to see people and have a cup of tea with them after I've sold something to them. And I let him go a little while, and I said, you're trying to sell me a bed for £2,000 that I know I can buy for £1,000. So your commission's what, 500? And he was crying by the time he left. And maybe I did some good in the world that day. I doubt it very much. But what you say is so true. You're up against a hardened ninja. Somebody, they do this all the time, and you are not Serena Williams or, somebody who's got a black belt in stabbing people or anything. And so, you've got to take your time. You've got to be well prepared for the contest. And as you say, the vital piece of information is think twice. Go away, sleep on it. Think about it. And what's more, you'll probably get another $100 off the price if you do that.
You absolutely will. And you should never finish the deal until you get up and to walk out. Because they will keep negotiating until they see you're done. And you're not done until you get up to walk out. So you have to go through this little dance. And at some point say, this is the price I'm going to pay. If you want it, call me. And you get up and you walk out. And they'll probably stop you before you get to your car and say, okay, come on back, we'll do it. Even if they don't, they will call you when you get home the next day and say, come back and I'll give you your price. They have to know you're finished, or they will continue negotiating, and you have to show them. You can't say it. You've got to demonstrate it through your actions. Because words mean nothing. Actions show what you really think and feel.
Yeah. And do you get the floor mats free that way, or do you have to pay for them still?
Well, if you're a fool, if you pay extra for floor mats. It's the same. You can get the price of any car online if you do the research. Go to kellybluebook.com or edmunds.com or whatever the equivalent is, wherever you live. There's something that lists what the car dealer pays for the car and every one of the options. So you can go in knowing that. And you should dig even deeper, because they have other tricks like something called dealer holdback and dealer rebates, where that's not listed, but the manufacturer is going to give them $1,000 bonus. A dealer holdback is basically a bonus that's not listed. It's built into the sales price. It's a secret bonus that they get from the manufacturer. So you need to be aware of that, so you can subtract that from the price as well to get to their actual cost of the car. They're smart. They know that you can look up the price. And so they had to find other ways of burying their profits and calling it other things. Because dealer holdback, if you just read that and go, what does that mean? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't affect the price, so I can ignore it. Well, actually it does. And you need to become aware of those things. And people will say, it's just too much work. I don't have time. I just need to go and buy the car and be done with it. I'm going to go to a place where there's no haggling and just pay the price. That's like what they call you as a laydown. You're willing to come in and lay down and let them screw you. And that's what they're looking for. By saying I don't want to do the work, you're saying I'm not going to spend an hour and get paid $1,500 or $3,000 for that hour's work. I'm going to give up $3,000 so I don't have to work for 1 hour. That's what you're saying by not doing your homework.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true in all things in life that knowledge is power, that understanding how it's done, and so, absolutely go and check the book price, see what it should be, see if anybody knows what the dealer holdback is, do that. But first of all, go and watch this movie.
Suckers, yes. Suckers. You'll learn it right there. You'll learn 90% of their tricks in the movie Suckers, and you'll be aware and forearmed, and you'll be forewarned, and you will save money.
And it's the best form of education, unlike schools, where the idea is to bore you to death so you can regurgitate facts that you can forget the next day. which is called the educational system, you'll actually not even notice you're learning because you'll be so caught up in the stories that are going on. It's a great film. And
I've put the information on a blog also for the film's website. If you're interested, if you just go to my name, rogernygard.com, and go to my film Suckers, and there's a blog which lists all of the sales techniques to avoid. And if you want to be a good salesperson, actually, if you are a salesperson and you want to learn how to screw people, you can use it for the reverse. You can go and learn how to be a better salesperson, or you can learn how to avoid these tricks. They're all listed there on the website at rogernygard.com.
Which we will put a link for in the description below. And it's true that, I've often over the years people come to me and said, you're teaching people how to do this, by exposing the tricks. You shouldn't be doing that. And it has to come down to that you leave people helpless and defenseless if you don't. There are plenty of manuals. It fascinated me I found out the other week that one of the people that Nixon called while he was thinking about bombing Cambodia again was Norman Vincent Peale. And Norman Vincent Peale, of course, was Donald Trump's minister throughout his childhood. He was Fred Trump's great friend and wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, which is one of those manuals about how to blow away any opposition to your desires. How to be a practicing psychopath, basically, and not having to need empathy in this world to get your
I
own
want
way.
to teach people to be more how to defend themselves against these things and how to be a better consumer through an entertaining piece of art or film or documentary. And so Suckers is a narrative story that teaches people how to be aware of salesmen's techniques. And The Nature of Existence teaches people about religion and belief systems and how to be more aware by understanding them better while you have a few laughs and enjoy the journey. This is why people believe what they believe.
Fantastic. So I'm John Atack, my guest Roger Nygard.
You
Thanks
can
so much.
find me at my website, rogernygard.com, where all my films are located. There's my shameless plug.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger.
Bye for now.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. If you shake hands with them, you really have to count your fingers afterwards.